as this was announced to Vortigern, he collected his own soldiers together and crossed the Humber to meet the Picts. When the two sides came together, the Britons and their enemies fought bitterly with each other, first on one flank and then on the other. In the end, however, the Britons did not have much battling to do, for the Saxons who were present fought so manfully that the enemy, used until now to being on the winning side, were forced to retreat almost immediately. Once he had won this victory with the help of the Saxons, Vortigern increased his gifts to them. To their leader, Hengist, he gave many lands in the neighbourhood of Lindsey, so that he could maintain himself and his fellow soldiers. Hengist was a clever man and an astute one. When he came to understand the friendship which the king bore him, he went to him and made the following request to him. My lord, on every side your enemies are harassing you yourself, and also those of your fellow countrymen who have any love for you. They are all threatening that they will recall Aurelius Ambrosius from the land of Armorica, so that they can depose you and make him king in your place. If you agree, let us send to our own country and invite more soldiers to come from there, so that our own battle strength may be increased. There is, too, one other boon that I would ask of you in your clemency, if I did not fear to have it refused to me. Send your messengers to Germany, answered Vortigern, and invite as many men as you have thought necessary. Then ask of me what you will, for it will not be refused to you. Hengist bowed his head and thanked Vortigern. You have rewarded me with large houses and broad estates, he answered, but not yet with the honourable position which should have seemed worthy of a nobleman, seeing that my ancestors were of noble blood. Together with so many other things, you ought indeed to have given me some city or castle, so that I could be held in greater respect among the princes of your kingdom. The rank of earl or prince could well have been offered to me as well, seeing that I come from a race that has held both titles. I am forbidden to make you gifts of that sort, answered Vortigern, for you are pagans and foreigners, and I do not yet know your habits and customs well enough to be able to consider you as the equals of my own countrymen. Even if I could look upon you as fellow citizens, I could never contemplate giving you something which would be disapproved of by the princes of my realm. I am your servant, replied Hengist. Grant me then, within the territory which you have assigned to me, as much land as can be encircled by a single once they had arrived, Hengist invited King Vortigern to his home to inspect the new building and to review the warriors who had just landed. The king came there incognito. He praised the fortress which had been built so quickly, and he took into his service the soldiers whom Hengist had summoned. While he was being entertained at a royal banquet, the girl, Renwin, came out of an inner room, carrying a golden goblet full of wine. She walked up to the king, curtsied low, and said, "Laverd king, wassail." When he saw the girl's face, Vortigern was greatly struck by her beauty and was filled with desire for her. He asked his interpreter what it was that the girl had said, and what he ought to reply to her. "She called you Lord King," answered the interpreter, "and did you honour by drinking your health. What you should reply is, 'Drink ale.'" Vortigern immediately said the words, "Drink ale," and ordered Renwin to drink. Then he took the goblet from her hand, kissed her, and drank in his turn. From that day to this, the tradition has endured in Britain that the one who drinks first at a banquet says "Wassail" to his partner, and he who takes the drink next replies, "Drink ale." Vortigern was tipsy from the mixture of drinks which he had consumed. Satan entered his heart, so that he fell in love with Renwin and asked her father to give her to him. I say that Satan entered his heart because, despite the fact that he was a Christian, he was determined to make love with this pagan woman. Hengist, who was a very clever man, immediately noticed the unbalanced nature of the king's personality. He consulted his brother Horsa and the other senior men who were around him as to what he should do about the king's request. They agreed unanimously that the girl should be handed over to the king, and that in exchange for her they should demand the province of Kent. No time was wasted. Renwin was given to Vortigern, and the province of Kent to Hengist. This last without the knowledge of Earl Gorangnus, who ruled over the territory. The king was married to the pagan woman that very night, and she pleased him beyond all measure. By this action he immediately incurred the enmity of his leaders, and indeed of his own sons, for he was already the father of 3 boys, whose names were Vortimer, Vortigern, and Passions. It was at this time that Saint Germanus, the bishop of Auxerre, came, and Lupus, bishop of Troyes, with him, to preach the word of God to the Britons. For their Christian faith had been corrupted not only by the pagans, but also by the Pelagian heresy, the poison of which had infected them for many a long day. However, the religion of the true faith was restored to them by the preaching of these saintly men. This they made clear almost daily by frequent miracles, for through their agency God performed many wonders, which Gildas has described with great literary skill in his treaty. As soon as Renwin had been handed over to the king, as described above, Hengist said to him, "I am now your father-in-law, and I have the right to give you advice. You must not spurn what I say, for with the powerful support of my people, you will overcome all your enemies. Let us invite my son Octa to come here, and his younger brother Ebissa, both of them distinguished warriors. Give them the lands which are in the northern parts of Britain, near to the wall between Deira and Scotland. There they will withstand the onslaught of the barbarians, so that you yourself can live peacefully on this side of the Humber. increased his strength daily. When the Britons saw this, they were afraid that the Saxons would rebel. They told the king that he should banish the newcomers from the lands over which he ruled, for pagans ought not to be in close communication with Christians, not to be allowed to infiltrate in this way, for the Christian faith forbade it. What was more, so large a force had now come that the inhabitants were terrified by them. Already no one could tell who was a pagan and who was a Christian, for the pagans were associating with their daughters and their female relations. By making such objections as these, they urged the king not to let the Saxons stay any longer, for they feared that their fellow countrymen would be crushed in some treasonable revolt. Vortigern was completely opposed to accepting his people's advice, for because of his wife he loved the Saxons above all other folk. Once the Britons understood this, they immediately deserted Vortigern. Angered with him as they were, they promoted his son, Vortimer, to the kingship. Vortimer was completely in agreement with the people and set to work to expel the barbarians, attacking them and making bloody inroads among them. He fought 4 pitched battles against the Saxons and won every one of them. The first was upstream along the river Derwent, and the second above the ford at Epiford, where Horsa and Catagern, the second son of Vortigern, met hand to hand and both died, but each was mortally wounded by the other. The third battle was on the sea coast, and there the Saxons fled, sneaking off like women to their ships and taking refuge in the Isle of Thanet. Vortimer besieged them there and harassed them daily with naval attacks. When they could no longer endure the assault of the Britons, the Saxons sent King Vortigern, who had fought on their side in all the battles, to his own son Vortimer, to ask permission for them to withdraw and to depart in safety to Germany. While the parley was being held, the Saxons seized the occasion to embark in their long ships and to sail off towards Germany, leaving their women and children behind. As soon as he had won this victory, Vortimer started to hand back to the inhabitants of Britain the possessions which had been removed from them. He treated them with affection and honour, and at the request of St. Germanus, restored their churches. A certain evil spirit, which had found its way into the heart of his stepmother Renwin, immediately became envious of this virtuous behaviour of his, and inspired her to plot Vortimer's death. Renwin collected all the information she could about noxious poisons, and then by the hands of one of his servants, whom she had first corrupted with innumerable bribes, she gave Vortimer a poison to drink. The moment that famous warrior had swallowed it, he was seized with a sudden debility, which left him no hope of survival. He immediately summoned all his soldiers to his presence, told them that he was dying, and shared out among them his gold and silver and whatever else his ancestors had accumulated. When the soldiers wept and wailed, he consoled them by saying that the road down which he was about to travel was the way of all flesh. He exhorted these brave young warriors, whose habit it had been to do battle at his side in his wars, to fight for their country and to do their utmost to defend it from hostile invasion. Then an extremely bold idea came to him. He ordered a bronze pyramid to be constructed for him and set up in the port where the Saxons usually landed. After his death, his body was to be buried on top of this, in the hope that when the barbarians saw his tomb, they would reverse their sails and hurry back he said, would dare to come near once they set eyes on his burial place. How great was the courage of this man, who was determined to be feared after his death by those whom he had terrified during his lifetime. However, once he really was dead, the Britons did quite differently, for they buried his body in the town of Trinovantum. Vortigern was restored to the kingship after the death of his son. At the request of his wife, he sent messengers to Hengist in Germany. To ask him to return to Britain. Hengist was to come secretly and with a few men only, for Vortigern was afraid that if he arrived in any other way, a quarrel would begin between the barbarians and the local inhabitants. As soon as he had heard of the death of Vortimer, Hengist collected together 300,000 fully armed men, fitted out a fleet, and came back to Britain. When the arrival of such an enormous host was made known to Vortigern and the princes of the realm, they became greatly incensed. They consulted together and decided to oppose the Saxons, to drive them away from their coasts. The daughter of Hengist sent messengers to tell her father of this decision, and he in his turn considered what he could best do to counteract it. Hengist brooded over the various lines of action he could adopt, and finally chose one of them. This was to approach the people of Britain as though his intentions were peaceful, and then to betray them. With this end in view, Hengist sent messengers to the king, ordering them to tell Vortigern that he had not brought this vast horde of men with him so that they could settle in the kingdom. With this end in view, Hengist sent messengers to the king, ordering them to tell Vortigern that he had not brought this vast horde of men with him so that they could settle in the kingdom with him, or so that, with their help, he could do violence to the country. The reason why he had brought them was that he had thought that Vortimer was still alive. It was Vortimer whom he had intended to resist, should that king have attempted to oppose him. Now that he was quite clear that Vortimer was dead, Hengist placed himself and his men at the disposition of Vortigern. From this vast force, the king should retain in his realm as many as he wished, and all those whom he wanted to dismiss should, with the full agreement of Hengist, return to Germany. If all this seemed acceptable to Vortigern, then Hengist asked him to name a day and a place where they might meet together, so that he, Hengist, could arrange everything in accordance with the king's wishes. When all this was announced to the king, it pleased him immensely, for the last thing he wanted was for Hengist to leave. After long debate, he ordered the Britons and the Saxons to assemble at the cloister of Ambrius on the first day of May, which was coming soon, so that these matters might be settled. This was agreed to on both sides. Hengist then thought out a new method of betrayal. He ordered each of his soldiers to conceal a large dagger inside his boot. At some moment, when in apparent security the Britons were discussing the subject in hand, Hengist himself would give his men this signal: Nimet our Saxes. Each of them should then be ready to attack boldly, the Briton standing beside him. In short, each should draw his dagger, and without a moment of hesitation cut his companion's throat. The appointed day soon came. They all gathered together in the neighbourhood which had been chosen, and the peace conference duly began. When Hengist saw that a suitable moment had come for his cloister of Ambrius, who had founded it then himself many years before. The Britons had all come there unarmed, thinking of nothing but the peace conference. The result was that the Saxons, who for their part had come there thinking of nothing but treachery, were able to kill them the more easily, unarmed as they were. However, the pagans did not achieve their objective without loss, for many of them were slain as they tried to kill their enemies. The Britons picked up stones and sticks from the ground and struck down their betrayers in self-defence. A certain Count of Gloucester, called Eldol, was among those present. The moment he saw this act of treachery, he seized a wooden stake, which he had found by chance, and proceeded to defend himself with it. He broke the limbs of anyone within reach whom he could hit with this piece of wood, dispatching him forthwith to hell. He shattered skulls, arms, shoulder blades, and even legs, causing the greatest possible terror, and before he left the spot he had killed 70 men with a stake which he held. He could not resist so vast a force for long, but got away and sought refuge in his own city. Many were killed on both sides, but the Saxons had the upper hand, for the Britons, who had not expected anything of this sort to happen, had come unarmed and had little chance of offering resistance. The Saxons had intended to kill Vortigern, so that they might complete the evil task which they had begun, but instead they bound him tight and threatened him with death, demanding his cities and his fortresses in exchange for his life. Vortigern immediately conceded everything that they demanded, given only that he might be allowed to escape alive. When everything had been promised them on oath, the Saxons freed him from his chains. They went first to London and captured the city. Next they took York, Lincoln and Winchester, ravaging the neighbouring countryside and attacking the peasantry, just as wolves attack sheep, which the shepherds have forsaken. When Vortigern saw this horrible devastation, he fled to certain parts of Wales, not knowing what he could do against this accursed people. In the end, Vortigern summoned his magicians, asked them for their opinion, and ordered them to tell him what to do. They all gave him the same advice, that he should build for himself an immensely strong tower, into which he could retreat in safety if he should lose all his other fortresses. He surveyed a great number of places in an attempt to find a site suitable for this, and in the end he came to Mount Erith. There he assembled stonemasons from different parts of the country and ordered them to build a tower for him. The masons gathered and began to lay the foundations of the tower. However much they built, one day the earth swallowed. Up the next, in such a way that they had no idea where their work had vanished to. When this was announced to Vortigern, he consulted his magicians a second time, to give them a chance of explaining the reason for it. They told him that he should look for a lad without a father, and that, when he had found one, he should kill him, so that the mortar and the stones could be sprinkled with the lad's blood. According to them, the result of this would be that the foundations would hold firm. Messengers were immediately sent out through the different parts of the country to find such a person if they could. They came to a town which was afterwards called Merlin, and there they saw some lads playing by the town gate. They went to look at the must decide in your wisdom, my lord, who was the father of this lad, for apart from what I have told, I have never had relations with a man." The king was amazed by what he heard. He ordered a certain Morgantius to be summoned to him, so that this man could tell whether or not what the woman said was possible. Morgantius was brought in and listened to the whole story, point by point. In the books written by our sages, he said to Vortigern, and in many historical narratives, I have discovered that quite a number of men have been born in this way. As Apuleius asserts in the De Deo Socrates, between the moon and the earth live spirits, which we call incubus demons. These have partly the nature of men and partly that of angels, and when they wish, they assume mortal shapes that have intercourse with women. It is possible that one of these appeared to this woman and begot the lad in her. When he had listened to all of this, Merlin went up to the king and asked, "Why have my mother and I been brought into your presence?" "My magicians have advised me," answered Vortigern, "that I should look for a fatherless man, so that my building can be sprinkled with his blood and thus stand firm." "Tell your magicians to appear in front of me," answered Merlin, "and I will prove that they have lied." The king was amazed at what Merlin said. He ordered his magicians to come immediately and sit down in front of Merlin. "Just because you do not know what is obstructing the foundations of the tower, which these men have begun," said Merlin to the magicians, "you have recommended that my blood should be sprinkled on the mortar to make the building stand firm. Tell me, then, what lies hidden under the foundation. There is certainly something there which is preventing it from holding firm." The magicians, who were terrified, said nothing. Merlin, who was also called Ambrosius, then went on, "My lord king, summon your workmen, order them to dig in the earth, and underneath you will find a pool. That is what is preventing the tower from standing." This was done. A pool was duly found beneath the earth, and it was this which made the ground unsteady. Ambrosius Merlin went up to the magicians a second time and said, "Tell me now, you lying flatterers, what lies beneath the pool?" They remained silent, unable to utter a single sound. "Order the pool to be drained," said Merlin, "and at the bottom you will observe 2 hollow stones. Inside the stones you will see 2 dragons which are sleeping." The king believed what Merlin said, for he had told the truth about the pool. He ordered the pool to be drained. He was more astounded by Merlin than he had ever been by anything. All those present were equally amazed at his knowledge, and they realized that there was something supernatural about him. So that ends part 4 of the book, The House of Constantine. So that seems like a good place to end this video.